Hello, everyone. This is the first in sort of the new format of our series of Seaside sessions. And I hope in this format we'll be able to maybe dig a little bit deeper. And we've just begun the liturgical season of Pentecost. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Now, the day of Pentecost commemorates the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles and other followers of Jesus. This event is described in the book of Acts, specifically in Acts 2. In it, we read about an unusual event that occurred on this day when the 12 apostles and Jesus's other early followers were gathered together in a house in Jerusalem to celebrate the traditional Jewish Pentecost. And I will read you that passage from Acts. When Pentecost Day arrived, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound from heaven, like a howling fierce wind, filled the entire house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be individual flames of fire alighting on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. There were pious Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. When they heard this sound, a crowd gathered. They were mystified because everyone heard them speaking in their native language. Lost my place. They were surprised and amazed, saying, "Look, aren't all the people here who are speaking Galileans, every one of them? How can each of us hear them speaking in our native language?" Parthians, Medes, Elamites, as well as residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the regions of Libya bordering Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism. Cretians and Arabs, we hear them declaring the mighty work of God in our own language. They were all surprised and bewildered. Some of them asked each other, "What does this mean?" So what stands out to me here is that though these people were from all different places, different cultures, and they all spoke different languages, but they understood each other. As they said, how can that be? I mean, this is no small thing. And the key word here to me is understood, understanding. Now, understanding means something very different than communication. So let's start by looking at the dictionary definition of these words. Communication is defined as transmission, exchanging data or information between entities, an instance of information transfer, a verbal or written message, a conversation or discourse. Understanding is defined as the power of comprehending, the power to make experience intelligible by applying concepts and categories, an agreement of opinion or feeling, friendly or harmonious relationships, adjustment of differences. Now that last one is interesting to me, and we're going to come back to that. Sorry, I need to not move because I'm in weird light and Zoom is trying to adjust and then it adjusts and I move. So speaking of adjusting, understanding. So these are very different things. Communication, transfer of information. Understanding goes a little bit further than that. And so you can communicate with someone without understanding them. At least you can communicate with them at a certain level. Like the dictionary definition says, you can transfer information to each other. But does that mean you will have a feeling of a harmonious relationship with them? Not really, or at least not necessarily. How many times have you thought about someone, why can't they just understand such and such? And frankly, there's someone very close to me that I often just think, oh, how could you possibly think that way? Don't you just see that this? So there are many people in the world that likely we feel like we can't communicate with very well with. And for me, and likely some of you, there are some people we just scratch our heads saying, how can they possibly think that? How could they possibly vote for that person? But so much of that is because we only consider what's on the surface. And this culture of ours today, that is usually all we get to see of most people. And that social media glossed over, curated version of people and their stories. these superficial versions of people's selves. But if we get just a bit beyond, that person thinks such and such, and I don't agree, we often think. And if we dig just a tad deeper to get people's stories, we could see why a person might think the way they do. If we could have a real, actual conversation with them, we might unearth those things that we share in common. And those beliefs we hold as to what's most important might just be the same, even if we've been led to different ways of reaching what our priorities are. And this leads to a deeper understanding of one another. And this is real communication, not just transfer information, but understanding. So the other thing that stood out to me as I was putting this together, this lesson, was that unexpected definition of understanding that included adjustment of differences. That's not something I'd really thought about so much in the past as part of understanding. Like the other words in the definition all kind of jived with what I would have expected. Harmonious, agreement, comprehending, adjustment of differences. That made me think. We all have our entirely own unique experiences, and hence our own beliefs and outlooks in the world. And everyone has had different experiences in their life. So we are all going to not see things exactly the same way. So to understand someone is to see something from their perspective, which is inherently going to differ at least a tiny bit from our own. So we have to adjust and say, oh, well, I had this experience that made me think this, or my parents taught me such and such. But now that you explain it, I can see how you might think this or that. And that's an adjustment of our own views. Instead of narrowly just looking at the world through our own eyes, we see the world through the eyes, we can see the world through the eyes of others as well, adjusting our own worldviews based on the experiences that other people have. And that is understanding. So let's think back to the Pentecost story in Acts. Although all those who came together at Pentecost were from different places and spoke many different languages, they were able to understand each other because they shared something they all deeply cared about, in this case, God. We hear them telling in their own language about the great things God has done. Though their languages were different, their love of God and understanding of God was the same. So they're able to understand each other through this common thinking and this shared concern. I don't want to oversimplify things and say, oh, why can't we all just get along? Because it's obviously not as easy as that. And the thing is, there will always be people we feel like we just can't understand, and with whom communication therefore feels impossible. But most people do, in fact, share at least a few things that they care about in the world. And if we go just one step beyond the, I don't understand them, I don't understand why they think that, and we take just a bit more time to look more deeply and consider our commonalities, we might be better able to at least understand others around us and communicate with them in a more meaningful and true way. So how do we do this? It's all well and good to talk about it, but to conclude, let's take a moment to consider this on a more practical level. Like, how can we move towards better communication through understanding in our daily lives? Well, first is kind of simple and obvious, but be friendly, be respectful. No matter what culture someone is from, even if you don't share the same language, people understand if you're being nice. And sometimes I was gonna say it's not hard to be nice, but sometimes it can feel hard to be nice, but it really isn't. And sometimes if we don't agree with someone, it's easy to not be friendly with them. So always just remember, be friendly and treat them with kindness. Embrace humility. Acknowledge that you don't have all the answers. No one has all the answers, and you might learn something from someone else. Keep an eye out for unconscious bias. You might believe that you don't have any pre-existing points of view about a certain topic or about a certain culture, but you might have them hidden under there in ways that you don't know. And finally, speaking of adjustment of views, remain adaptable. Keep an open mind in any environment and situation. Which brings us right back to that definition of understanding and the adjustment of views. And if we're willing to open our minds to other perspectives and at least try to see things from other eyes, we can learn more about other people's motivations, connect with them more, communicate more effectively, and maybe broaden our own lives by seeing things in a different way. That is it for today. I will see you next month, and the weather is looking beautiful this week. I hope you have a great week.